Hello, everyone, and welcome to IOHR TV. I'm Louise Pine-Jones, and I'm Head of Research at IOHR. Since February 2019, the attention of the world and media has been on the question of repatriation of women and children associated with the so-called Islamic State. The discussion stemmed from the then UK Home Secretary Javid's decision to revoke the citizenship of Shamima Begum, a young British woman who had left the UK for Syria with two friends in 2015. The decision to revoke her citizenship brought a number of human rights debates to the fore, including the question of citizenship rights, statelessness, and international justice. Today, I'm interviewing Vera Mironova, research fellow at Harvard and author of the book From Freedom Fighters to Jihadists, Human Resources of Non-State Armed Groups. Vera is going to share with us her insight into the women and children living in the camps such as Al Hol and Roj. Vera, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
You have carried out frontline research and you are a frontline scholar. Can you tell us about some of your work in the theatres of war and how you consolidated the academic research with being on the front line?
I worked in Yemen. I worked in Iraq extensively for like 5 years. I worked in Ukraine during the Ukraine-Russian war. So basically, I'm interested in behavior of fighters and those involved in the conflict. So I usually, interview fighters. I am embedded with fighters on different sides, and so on. When I started grad school as a political science, I was just surprised that there's a lot of assumptions, but we don't actually know what those people think, right? We assume. And I'm like, yeah, but like I could go and figure it out. I could go and ask them, right? Mm. But back then in a grad school, it was like, no, like, how are you even envisioning that? You're crazy. I'm like, nah, I'm just going to go there and ask them. So first I started with just interviewing fighters on the front line. Then I started conducting surveys, and now I'm often going embedded with different armed groups, from radical Islamist groups to, I don't know, in Yemen, when Houthis took Sana'a, I was there. And in Ukraine, I was with neo-Nazi armed groups. Because how would we know what they think if we don't ask them, don't see how they behave and so on?
You have some close insight into women in the Al Hol camp. What aspect would you say that you found in your discussion with these women, generally speaking, that surprised you the most?
I was surprised by how many of them are actually not supporting the group. So if we look at what they're writing online, and a lot of researchers, journalists do that, I mean, simply because it's hard to get inside or close access to those females, it feels like everyone is supporting ISIS and they're all this hardcore group of diehard ISIS supporters. But in fact, that's not true. There's maybe a small group of those females left in the camp, but majority are either don't care anymore, don't like the group anymore, or support it for strategical reasons and, from the social pressure reasons, but they actually are not fans.
You said that what surprised you the most is the fact that many women are not attracted to the IS ideology anymore. They don't support it anymore. Would this element influence our policymakers' decision to repatriate these women?
I don't think they were aware of that, and I'm not sure it's going to affect their decision, because it doesn't matter about majority or minority in their case, because they, as government and law enforcement, they have to answer for each and every one they bring home. So anyway, they're going to have to do the screening one by one if they choose to bring them home.
What do you think about the role of women in militant or terrorist groups? Do you think that those roles are misconstrued by the public or by policymakers?
The role of women in ISIS, it changed with time, right? So first maybe majority were housewives, but then when males died, they had to take their place. So they were fighting. They were fighting a lot in last basically months of ISIS, both in Mosul and Syria. But I asked people I know in a camp, and they said that there is no one they know who was fighting is alive. So it's not a concern. What I would be really worried, and I'm really worried about, are not fighters. Fighters is just cannon meat, those guys, not important, not dangerous. I mean, dangerous, but not in that sense. But the ones who were either themselves members of Amnia, ISIS intelligence, internal intelligence, or were wives of Amnia. And there are a disproportional number of those females in this camp. And I know personal cases when one female, her husband was Amnia, she's Amnia, and she's still proudly talking to everyone in the camp how she used to execute either prisoners or spies herself while in ISIS.
To what extent is grooming a key factor to consider when analysing the current situation of women living in the camp?
I know a lot of young girls who came there, they were brought there by their family members, and when they were like 16 or 15, they were minor, but now they're not supporting the group anymore. So it's kind of, I don't think it's really correlated if they were groomed into supporting it or not. So I have a family, like the whole family moved to ISIS, including grandparents. And the youngest daughter, she's the one who is not supporting ISIS. And she's the youngest. She was the only one who was brought in as a minor and immediately married to a fighter, everything. And she's the one, she's like, nah, not my thing. She actually moved out. Hello? She ran away.
We know that some women have been repatriated. Which countries are currently doing so, and what are women feeling about the prospect of returning home?
Some women do not want to come back, which is very nice selection, right? So you don't want to come back? Thank you, bye ISIS. So, for example, Kazakhstan recently repatriated like everyone. Males, females, kids, everyone but 3 females who managed to hide. So those are, and I have friends who know them, and they said that those women are very hardcore ISIS. So they intentionally did hide not to get back to Kazakhstan. And now they're in Idlib, then they smuggle themselves out. The same thing with France. I know that one woman with 3 kids, she also hid. And kind of she's now living in a hole like illegally because they were taking someone, but she didn't want to go. Of course, they're hard ISIS supporter. A lot of countries were taken. A lot of countries are still debating. My biggest problem is actually with countries that will not take and don't want to take. So who is the strongest, the most hardcore supporters of ISIS in a camp right now? Uyghurs. Where are they going to be repatriated? To China? Like, seriously? So, of course, they don't have anyone to even think of, like, helping them. So ISIS is all they have. A similar situation was in U.S. with Guantanamo when U.S. government finally decided that those people need to go home. And then they were like, where? To Uzbekistan that, like, did boil people in prison? Like, no. So they had a really hard time placing them to like random countries. So, we're always talk about, 1, 2 Americans, 3, 5, Australians, 7, 8 French. But like, this is just drop in the sea. We have a huge community of Uyghurs, a gigantic community of Russian speakers. That's a big problem.
On this topic, what are your thoughts on the repatriation of children without their mothers? Some women in the camps would actually like their children to go first without them to find safety. What do you think about this?
Oh, I like this idea, and that's what's going on right now in Iraq. After the trial for the woman, the kids are returned home. And I know a lot of women would not agree on that, and I know a lot did not already. Partially because they're afraid that if countries take kids home, they're going to just forget about them forever, and that would be it. So basically, they're kind of taking them hostage.
Are we prepared for the return of women, men, and children? Do you think that the current de-radicalization and rehabilitation programs are sufficient to successfully reintroduce people into their previous lives in their home countries?
If we're talking about Europe and US, first of all, I don't see any actual reintegration programs are legit. But I'm not worried about those couple, Western Europeans, like at all. I'm just not worried. Okay. But when we're talking about big numbers, let's take Russian citizens. What reintegration program we're talking about if basically all, for example, males who even got home and, were sorry and so on, and they're getting very long sentences in prison where they're getting radicalized and radicalize others. So West, I'm just not worried about it. Plus, if we're taking three women, for example, to Sweden, you could monitor them 24/7. It's like nothing. compared to actual countries with real big numbers.
What's the difference in numbers? For instance, you mentioned Russian-speaking countries.
In Kazakhstan, 600.
Mm.
And Kazakhstan is not the biggest. I mean, Russia, I would imagine a couple of thousand, like 2,000-3,000.
Mm.
And I'm also a little concerned that everyone is looking at Al-Hol and Roj about repatriation of women, but no one ever talks about what's going on in Iraq. And Al-Hol is like a 5-star location, vacation spot for them. The situation in Iraq is much more dire.
What kind of role has the media played in portraying women and children in the camps there?
I think media didn't cover it deep enough. So it were either like op-eds saying, oh my God, they're all innocent and look at those bad conditions and they need to go home and our poor kids and females didn't do anything. Or they're all like born killers. So there was no actually deep look into what role they were actually playing and why. The same thing with advocacy. So, for example, I'm writing a lot of controversial things about Al-Hol on my Twitter account, right? And I'm being attacked by both sides. So, for example, those groups of mothers looking for their, saving their children, they literally send me messages, Vera, you should not be writing those things. They're gonna negatively affect prospects of our daughters coming home, which, those things are true. And by the way, they know that. Because when I'm like, oh, you have a daughter there, so give me her phone number, I'm going to interview her. And it was a case of Russian-speaking, one Russian-speaking female. And they were like, oh, no, she's not going to talk to anyone, or she doesn't have a phone. But I know who she is. So I asked my friends there, like, who is this girl? And they were like, oh, she's a hardcore ISIS supporter. Mm. So, of course, her mom doesn't want her to talk to me because he's going to be, saying all this ISIS, a great thing.
What do you think about the importance of the use of language in the media?
I think it's very important, but I think also if someone uses the words like jihadi bride, I think it immediately sends a signal that this journalist is not unbiased. So I think in that sense, it's good because you immediately know how to read whatever he or she wrote.
Thank you, Vera, for being with us today.
Thanks.
Thank you for watching IOHR TV. Goodbye.